No, apparently not.
No. Apologies, that's fine. There's just a staff member outside that was waiting till it was open meeting.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, if I may. Okay. So this item is to introduce the group plan content, the development to date. Over the last year at various joint committee and key meetings, we've gone through like, what is a group plan? Why do we have it? Do we have to review it? So not going anywhere near those topics today. And the format being myself and there's GMO team leaders that are going to speak to specific sections, and of course Julian in support or extending where needed. And we've just had Danielle O'Shaughnessy, who is a GMO staff member who works in the hazard space. So when we get to that section, she's going to do a general overview with regard to hazards and that sort of thing for understanding. So I think I've already stated that this isn't the final content of the draft group strategic plan for consultation that will be put before the Joint Committee on the 24th of March for approving for public consultation, because there's still many CDEM work streams currently going on with subject matter experts doing input, reviewing. Okay, now while the other comment I just wanted to make is a query that came up. While the CDEM group strategic plan, it's a legislative document, it doesn't require a formal legal review at this stage. The primary reason is that the draft's intended for consultation and feedback rather than immediate implementation. The policy decisions and strategic directions outlined in the draft are subject to change based on the consultation process. And if it's those finalised policies that have more significant legal impact. So just to set the scene there, but we do recognise the value of a peer review. So peer review provides an opportunity for an expert in the field to assess the draft's content, ensuring it's comprehensive, practical, and in line with best practices in emergency management. So we've got that underway before the document comes to the Joint Committee. So just to give assurance there. What else have I got? Just as a general note, any cultural references and context is also up for review to ensure that they're appropriate and in the manner that they're used. Okay, and that's probably really about it, because once all those changes are done, then there'll be a final internal review to ensure that none of the tweaks obviously bring us out of line with the current requirements of the Act and all those sorts of things. So to ensure that we keep compliance, because if you move one area, just to make sure that it doesn't impact others. Okay, sorry, leading into the document, the forward from the chair, well, obviously I won't discuss that today because the chair's not here and that's her component introducing the draft document to the community. And so I'll go straight into the executive summary area. Okay, so this is where we provide an outline of the group strategic plan document. And this is where we first introduce a cultural reference, iwi, manahua whenua, and representation of Māori. And this is reflected throughout the rest of the document. The intent is to ensure inclusion. So from the tribal level, mana whenua incorporating hapu and marae and those structures, and also representation of Māori, which was highlighted during engagement, that we must reflect the uniqueness of Māori and the different ways across the region to be represented. So just with a standard with regard to that comment. Now, okay, so 1 minute, please. So I realise this is the first time that you're actually seeing the document in full. The structure is to keep it simplified, this is introducing us and what we're doing and what the intent of the document is, particularly to the public, so that they can open this and they can understand it. It highlights the key elements. Throughout the document, we've removed the references to the CDEM Act 2002. This one states that, but there is the disclaimer saying that this covers any subsequent amendments or replacement legislation to try future-proof this document. So as long as this document isn't out of alignment with any new act, So from there throughout the document, you'll just see it says the Act. So that gives an outline of that. And the vision, which I say we've been through, that's our aspiration, the goals, and the focus of those goals is align with the National Disaster Resilience Strategy, and that's to give that cohesive and unified approach through resilience across the area, but being able to support national consistency. I think everything else is self-explanatory, including the addendum documents. So by providing for, and this, how we're separating out the actions from the document, but they're provided for in this highest level group strategic plan. So it outlines the group action plan, what will be done on it, what the plan will support. It also that we have the Waikato risk assessment and summary, which was the attachment with your agenda. So by keeping those documents responsive to events, so following an event, it gives us the ability to flex and to be able to undertake a review of a specific hazard, and has it changed, the risk assessment of it, has it changed, rather than being tied to including it in this level and unable to keep up with changing environment. And also trying to put everything to the public so they can see the involvement of this document right through from the community survey, where the community responded and told us what was important to them before, during and after. So all those findings are available on the Civil Defence website. So it'll tell the story from the survey through the development of the hazard risk assessment and right through to the development of the document for consultation. And alongside that, we will put the regional CDEM Māori framework on the website, and that's linked into this document. And that's that operationalising of SIMS that caregivers have adopted. Okay. So I suppose if I just ask any questions at the end of each page, a lot of this is the very generic stuff that I'm going over, and I realise it's so just really anything new. The vision, we've been through the vision, and okay, was discussed and endorsed at Keegan Joint Committee meetings. It's about keeping it to the point to ensure it's easy to understand, remembered and communicated to everyone. So there's no change from what was proposed at previous Joint Committee meeting. Then moving into the goals, which is that alignment to the National Disaster Resilience Strategy. Goal number 1 has been extended from the wording that was previously put in front of you. So I'd just like to highlight that. So to make it relative at that regional level, it's had that note put in about through ongoing hazard research, hazard awareness, understanding risks and undertaking risk reduction. And under each of those goals, their explanation has been reviewed.
Excuse me, Vicky, have you got any more copies of that? If somebody needs one, yep, thank you.
Sorry.
For those that didn't pick one up. Do you need one, Emma? I got one. Yeah.
Okay. Apologies. Is everyone
set now?
Okay, so
yeah,
just in on page 7 is where I was. Thank you. So at this highest level, this is your document, your setting. So I suppose I just asked if you wanted to take the minute and look at those 3 goals. Like I say, they've all been presented in front of you before, with the first one being extended, and just ensure with the explanation put underneath that you're happy with that content. Or understand or would like any clarity, I suppose, would be the other. Okay, I'll move on. Thank you. Okay, through to the objectives and successes. Now, in this cut in time of the draft, you'll note that there are some draft objectives proposed. There's 8 of them, and they're around the core components of partnership, risk reduction, pre-planning, readiness, training, response and recovery, and enabling the community. at that highest level. There is an internal workshop occurring this week to work through the confirmation of what will be proposed and also identifying what those successes will look like by 2030. So nothing further to add to that. It was just to highlight that there are initial draft objectives proposed. And as we're not making any decisions today, obviously the content's here to take away and review at your leisure. Okay, and then, oh, did I get this one as well? Okay, then we lead into introducing the group and the area, about the dynamics of it, particularly in here, trying to show the complexity. So across New Zealand, that we have the largest number of local authority members, that we have the greatest number of iwi within our area of the CDEM groups across New Zealand, about those shared risks with our neighbouring CDEM groups. It's just really trying to paint that picture of what we're actually dealing with. Okay, and the key one, which I know we've all been through from previous meetings, is those boundaries and that non-alignment of boundaries. So acknowledging that is between our partner agencies, but where there might be 4 agencies represented within our area, that's dealt with through one group like the Emergency Services Coordination group. So there is a agreed representative from FENS on that, not one from each area, and they then become the liaison between the others. So it's just clarifying that structure is in place. So this is just really that brief introduction. Focus from a community level understanding. So is what it is. And the whole document's designed that the front part is right up to the hazards, is what we see the community being really interested in, needing to be informed of and understand. And the part that relates to more the group, the partner agencies, is at the back of the document. So it's a comm style of laying out a document. So if there's no questions on those general areas, I will.
Waikato, just pull it into you, just for the people online. Yeah, it's hard. Okay. Yep. My name's Mark Bang, and I'm a team leader in the Group Emergency Management Office. So I'm just starting off on page 13. It's to do with partnerships with iwi, mana whenua, and groups representing Māori. I guess fair to say it's quite a departure from our existing group plan, which has 2 paragraphs on page 72 in terms of partnering with Māori. So that is an improvement. Key to this page is recognition of the strength and importance of Māori in emergency management and acknowledging that, which is important. And that's evidenced through examples during COVID-19 and the North Island severe weather events being the most recent. This page has been advised to us by the Regional Council Tauranga Whenua team, and establishes the 5 po as listed there. The mana of iwi leaders, the mana tangata, the iwi to support their people and those within their tribal boundaries. Kaitiakitanga is iwi and hapu to uphold the well-being of the land, water and living beings. And mana whenua, the unique role of mana whenua in managing their lands. And the whakama, committing to work with iwi, mana whenua and representations of Māori for emergency management initiatives. we've tried, I guess it's fair to say, and if I kind of step back to those objectives, you'll see that we don't have objectives, well, we have one objective specific to Māori, and the other objectives we have tried to weave the involvement of Māori through those objectives, rather than having separate Māori objectives. We started heading down that path, but it got quickly apparent to us that we were repeating a lot, and it made more sense. And you know, it signifies involvement in the emergency management system, where we weave the engagement and involvement of Māori into those objectives, rather than having separate ones. Any thoughts or considerations on that? Moving on to the 4 R's of emergency management, I'm not going to labour that. It's well known through our current act, through our current group plan. You know, we'll just on the iwi space, it's very clear from the strategic documents produced by iwi that climate change strategies are very important to iwi. Marae preparedness is very important, but so too is response to climate change, and that's in that reduction area. So that's a piece of work of, you know, that's the what is how do we engage with iwi on that climate change, on that reduction area.
Thank you, Mark. Michael's got questions.
Yeah, this is a big one for me, reduction, and I think TAs really need to look at their plans on what they're doing, and the especially long-term plans on identifying and mitigating risk to reduce impact in structures. So that's new subdivisions or stuff like that. And also, I think territory authorities need to take more on board that when they have weather events forecasted, instead of just putting it on Facebook, hey, there's a thunderstorms and heavy rain due, they should be proactive getting their staffs out to clear drains and stuff like that. You know, we had an incident just before Waitangi weekend where heavy rainfall and it flooded because a lot of the water drainage weren't cleaned out. All the wet socks down on the lakefront probably should have been taken out for a heavy rain event, and it caused flooding. A lot of houses, a lot of insurance claims through that. So I think authorities can be a lot more proactive on preventing in these, because now we're getting weather events where the rain downfall in a short period of time is horrendous, and the infrastructure proved it up in Auckland, you know, when they had that event last year. Their infrastructure is just not built for those, you know, what we call now the weather, whether you want to call it climate change or just the weather events that we're having in short periods of time, or the downfall rain. So yeah, you know, especially with you know, infrastructure improvements, you know, building codes and standards, you know, I think that's a big one that we need to kind of build in and have more to do with TAs.
Can I just comment on that a little bit, Michael? Just a lot of councils don't work on the weekend, so of course you've got to mobilise them when there's those sorts of events, to particularly down in that Taupo event. You've got to mobilise them to get them going. And it was the same in Auckland for the, you know, that long weekend. The event happened and then they were mobilised, instead of knowing that the event was coming and trying to mobilise them before it actually hit. That's one of the biggest problems, I think.
Yeah, Thomas, I appreciate that, but they do have knowledge of that. You know, like that weather event was forecast a week earlier that thunderstorms and heavy rain was coming. And it was proven that because the person that, the councillor that put it on Facebook said, you know, look, this weather event's coming. So, you know, Waitangi Day was on Thursday, so I appreciate that's a day off, but they knew before that, you know, they could still enable their staff to go out on a Wednesday or a Friday to make sure all drains were cleared, you know, for that heavy event.
You're right, thanks.
Good, and that's the challenge for local authorities, right, is making emergency management holistic, as opposed to one or two people's job in terms of that readiness what are the processes, what are the procedures when there is an event warning or a period on the horizons, what action do we take as an organisation, as opposed to, a few people with wearing a blue shirt.
Does it also go wider than that, that it's also part of the ongoing process of preparedness and encouraging people to have plans and those type of things? So.
Yes, and that's very firmly in the wheelhouse of that readiness activity. It's organisational and it's community level readiness. So whether that's through public education, helping them understand what they should do as whānau, as householders, as organisations, in those circumstances, and being ready for when something does happen. I guess one of the topics, and we're going to throw over to Dan in a moment to talk about the hazards part, but one of the things that I'm aware of is the word resilience charging into our lexicon more and more, and I think my view of the group plan is that we should be using the 4 Rs. So when we're talking about readiness, we talk about readiness. We don't talk about resilience, because resilience is, I think, can be considered as a sum of all of the activities we do. So I can be resilient through my knowledge and my ability to respond quickly or to flex and move, but not ready. So there is a difference, and I think we need to be careful with the use of our language and understand that where we're talking about readiness, reduction, response and recovery, that we use that language rather than using the catch-all of resilience. Oh no, I'm carrying on. Yes, sorry. 4 Rs. The 4 Rs. We've just covered it, and yeah, it's over to Danielle. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to talk to the hazard section. Although it's a small section within the draft, it's I'm going to go a bit more around the hazard risk assessment report. So it's going to go in a little bit more detail around some of the hazards we're exposed to here in New Zealand and the Waikato region. And so in the plan, it breaks it up into natural hazards, technological or human hazards, and biological hazards. So looking at those natural hazards, New Zealand is actually positioned along the collision zone of 2 large tectonic plates in the world, so the Pacific plate and the Australian plate. And so what that does is that means New Zealand's exposed to quite a lot of geological hazards. For example, earthquakes. So there are multiple active fault lines throughout New Zealand capable of generating earthquakes, and those earthquakes can generate subsequent hazards such as liquefaction, ground shaking, landslides, tsunami. Along the east coast of the North Island, there's the Hikurangi subduction zone, and so that's where the 2 plates are converging, so they're coming together. And what that can do is that can either force it to buckle up and create mountains, or it can push one of the plates underneath, and so that can either lead to the magma melting, and that can generate volcanoes, or actually the buildup of stress can lead to some large and significant and powerful earthquakes, and the potential of generating some significant tsunami. There's also volcanoes throughout New Zealand and within the Waikato region. New Zealand has 3 types of volcanoes. So there's the cone volcano, which is formed through eruptions of ash, rock, and lava, or there is caldera volcanoes like Topor, and so that's when it erupts, but the volcano then collapses into its empty magma chamber, and then there's the volcanic field like in Auckland, and that's where there can be small volcanoes that may only erupt once. The tsunamis, that's where there is they normally consist of multiple waves that surge or rush inland, kind of like a fast rising tide, and it's there's a lot of powerful currents within it, and some of the triggers can be those large under the ocean volcanoes or those earthquakes, but also from landslides in the ocean or from landslides on land where the debris actually falls then into the water. New Zealand's actually exposed to tsunamis from 3 different sources. So there's the distant sources, so that's Pacific-wide, for example, South America. Then there's regional source tsunamis, for example, the Kumudek Trench, and then there's local source tsunamis, for example, the Hikurangi subduction zone. And those tsunamis could actually arrive within an hour. And then there are the water or hydrological hazards. So that's looking at things like, we talked about severe thunderstorms, hailstorms, droughts, those tropical cyclones, river flooding, flash flooding, coastal inundation, and also, as it's been discussed already, the effects of climate change are already being experienced here in the Waikato region, but that it's projected to continue to increase the frequency and severity of these natural hazards. So that could mean, more extreme weather, higher temperatures, increased coastal erosion, increased inland flooding, increased landslides or soil erosion, sea level rise, increased fire weather. So that's the weather conditions that are conducive to fire, either its occurrence or its subsequent behavior. And then moving on to the technological or human hazards. So those are the ones that are entirely or predominantly from human activities. So some examples of that could be infrastructure failure, transport accidents, fires, or factory explosions. And then the biological hazards. So that is organic substances that pose a threat to health of people or other living organisms. And some examples are like the human pandemic with COVID-19 or the pest or animal disease, or such as the avian bird flu. What I want to do now is just briefly talk through something called the holistic consequence analysis, which is used behind the scenes of the risk hazard assessment. What it does, it takes that hazard, starts to look at the impacts, and then actually into those consequences, because that's how we start to understand the risk. And that's then what drives the kind of actions within the 4 Rs that forms a lot of the work that we do. So what I'm going to do is just use the scenario of Cyclone Gabriel from February. And so feel free to contribute or add to the discussion. So the hazards experienced during Cyclone Gabriel here in the Waikato was prolonged heavy rain, strong wind gusts, storm surges, inland and coastal flooding and landslides. So using the environments on page, jumping ahead, 18, I'm just going to briefly look at some of the impacts across the social, the built, the economic and the natural environments, and then what that might look like in the consequences. So the social environment, for that, what we're doing is looking at kind of people, communities, those vulnerable. So some of the impacts in Cyclone Gabriel in the social environment would be people who are evacuated or displaced, and people are injured, schools or workplaces are closed, or people are unable to participate in cultural activities. And some of the impacts along the built. And so when I'm talking about built, that's those buildings, infrastructure, and things like that. So damage to buildings, so that could be residential buildings or commercial buildings. Damage to infrastructure around the roads, bridges, water pipes or treatment plants, power outages or communication outages. Some of the impacts to the economic, so looking at economic, that is local economies, businesses, people's income. Some of that could be damage, that damage loss to homes or commercial buildings, businesses having to close and so losing income, impacts to supply chains through road closures, workplaces being closed so people can't have an income, or flooded and contaminated farmland. Some of the natural impacts, so that would be contamination of land or reduced soil quality, damage to the habitats of native animals, or damage to plants, flowers and economies. So that's just some of the impacts. What it does now is it actually starts to look at the consequences, and actually it becomes evident that a lot of those consequences, although the impacts are to a certain environment, cross all the environments and have interdependencies, and that's where we start to understand that level of risk. So for example, if workplaces are closed or schools are closed, then people may not be able to work, which could mean that they have reduced or no income. Actually, a lot of schools supplement families through the provision of food like breakfast and lunches. And so if the schools are closed and that's not available, then that's adding more financial stress and pressure to families. Damage to their homes. They may not have insurance, or they may have some insurance but have to navigate working with insurance companies, which can lead to additional stress or pressures on that psychological well-being of our people. There might be isolation because the roads are closed or people are displaced from where they normally live in those support networks. Or if the communication's out, there's that lack of connectivity. And so that's, again, compounding that psychological stress. Looking at the damage to infrastructure, the consequences from that, if there's wastewater or power outages, things like that, then that will maybe be what's displacing the people as opposed to actually damage to their homes. Looking at consequences on the local economy, if local businesses are having direct damage costs or losing income from being closed, especially if tourism is one of the economic factors, then they're not going to be able to get up and running. They're going to have reduced business, and so it's going to take longer for them to get back up and running, which is then going to reduce the contribution to the local economy. Also, if there's potential reputational damage to businesses or local areas, possibly reducing the visitors and customers, so it leads to those longer term consequences. This could also lead to job losses, which again leads to those longer term consequences. Road closures and prolonged loss of power to farm facilities or equipment or contaminated farmland could also lead to more consequences for primary industries, having reduced income or having to let go of farm workers. So it's all of these kind of overlapping interdependencies across the different environments, and that looking at that, we understand what the consequence is, along with the likelihood of that hazard, and that helps us understand the risk. So what I'll do now is I'll pass over to Vicky, who's going to talk through then the actual methodology behind the risk assessment. Before I do, does anyone have any questions on the hazard side of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay. So mine is just more on the process that was undertaken in our Waikato Regional Civil Defence Group Hazard Risk Assessment. So, and I suppose really it's just to clarify, that document are the hazards risk assess at a regional maximum credible event scenario. They're not the individual local authorities, because you obviously will have events that are different range of high, medium and low at your local authorities of how they impact you. So across the region in the first instance, there were workshops that took place over multiple years. There were the lead agencies and the subject matter expert science agencies that fed in, and those maximum credible events were developed. From that, workshops were had with invitation from across all the region, again with partners, agencies, emergency services, and went through from all that knowledge of the consequences. The outlying systems provided by NEMA, so there's a national consistency, so it's a one size fit all. It really does come with a spreadsheet where you plug in your findings and it puts out the results. So from that aspects, groups individually can, so I should say there's no national guidance in what you actually have to list as hazards. So we did look across the regions to look at alignment, and that's part of that comment about allowing some flex, because hazards and risks are evolving all the time. And if we just say, this is it, we don't have to do this again for 5 years, this is just what our community sees. So we've putting the report to the outside of the group strategic plan, so that report can be updated, and there'll be commentary in the group strategic plan that supports that. It does show, a lot of this document's written, it has to, for the requirements, show the current findings, like the current structure of the group. There's lots of current things that have to be included in here, but we're giving ourselves the flexibility there. So really, what else? So the full report was attached to the agenda for this workshop without going through detail upon detail. That's why I wanted Danielle to set the scene, because she's the expert, and it's a lot of the maximum credible event scenarios, they either technically have an annual return interval or an annual exceedance probability, ARI and AEP. There's very few that have subjective, and those that were, after we had a contract to do the initial report, we went like, let's just fact check these, go back to those subject matter experts, go that those findings haven't been influenced greatly by one perspective and not the other. So that's why the process was extended again, and the document was finalised just before Christmas in the office, and those extra findings were put in there, along with an additional analysis, which from a perspective of your high, medium, low, in the, I know it's not on the screen, but in the attached report, I'm just actually going to find this because it broke down, sorry, those technology problems this morning and I was unable to print. It broke down by the agencies that we work with.
Excuse me, Vicky, could you just let us know what page you're on so then Brooke can put it up on the screen, please? Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, it was still the same page as Daniel. We'll go to page 17. That has the findings of the risk assessment. So that's probably the focus of this. That provides the findings. There's the one table in the document. So there's not a whole flurry of confusing information again, and like I say, repetitive of the full report. That is for the community to see, for the Waikato CDEM group as a region, what our hazards have been assessed at, risk assessed at, based on those categories that are set in the NEMA system. Sorry, I'm just going to see if I can find a reference in the attachment to the agenda, which Vicky cannot find in a hurry. I do apologise. Page 17 in the hazard risk assessment report, there's an analysis of the hazards by their type. So they're listed by the natural hazards, and from the very high to the low, the biological hazards from the very high down to high actually, and the technology human hazards from the high to the low. And the interesting analysis that came out of that, if you look at it, is in the biological hazards, all four are either very high or high. So now, you know, when you're looking at a focus of what are we doing as a group or as governance, that provides you some direction. You know, this is giving you the information to understand, and the community, but it was just a very good analysis going, what work are we doing in that field? And that will then follow through in the settings of those successes of the group strategic plan. So you can just start to see how these components input and take shape, the little bits of the jigsaw of the puzzle, I suppose. So without going into anything further, I just really want to ask if there's any questions, because you've got the full report, you've got the findings, you've got all the various analysis, but that was the structure of how it was done in the group. And like I say, it was literally over years, because you've got to imagine getting the volume of people together, the time commitments and all that, and it was very thoroughly done. So I'll just do any questions on that section.
I haven't got a question. I just thought that the way you're doing it, which is you're effectively just putting the chart into the actual document, but keeping the other information out, is a very good way of doing it.
Yeah, that's that whole trying to lift it, into that strategic, inform the community what they need to know, because there has to be an understanding across the community, but keep that flexibility as a group that there is a document outside of, and it's just that smart referencing saying this document is there, you point in the direction, but that is subject to change. Following events, we should be reviewing hazards after all the assessments and all that. We've got those findings. We don't need to sit on those for 2 years and then do everything all together. It enables, I know like some councils do rolling reviews of district plans, that sort of thing, which spreads out the workload, the finances, and makes it very practical too. So, okay. I'll move on now. Danielle went through all those environments. So we're on to page 26, the group structure. And I suppose, as I alluded to with the previous thing, it's got a keyword added up the top, because this document may not be where we are in 5 years' time about the current structure of the group to support the function and governance and leadership and delivery. So just some little key enabling words that we need to reflect. We have to state the structure of the group, but it's just a cut at this particular time.
Vicky, Michael's got a question for
Thank
you.
you. Just on that, I'd like to add on the purpose, because I don't think it's just leadership. I think we should have the words, support, resources or capabilities in there. And I left school at 15, but I think, it's not just leadership. We should be our purpose.
Yes. I'll put that feedback in, and that's what today's about, is adding that feedback so that the draft that comes in front of you reflects your input. So thank you. That covers off the purpose. Obviously, we just have to state about the democratic arrangements, roles and responsibilities. Now, there's been some variation in wording from the current one to try strengthen it up. So saying about the functions of the joint committee include but are not limited to, again, allowing that flex, but it's in that risk management that we've just covered off, the assessments, and also into that cost-effective risk reduction measures, which you spoke about earlier, actually planning for civil defence, delivering it, providing assistance to other groups, and promoting and monitoring civil defence within your areas. You are the conduit between the group and the public in your areas and your local authorities. So,
sorry,
Michael,
can I
got
just
another
add
one?
on to that? Right through this document, I don't believe it's strong enough. And already we've had, a lot of your staff, yourself, have done a lot of work, through the JMAs and hearing, already back from the community and stuff like that. And I think when this plan comes out, it needs to be, it says even to that our responsibilities, both at central, regional and local, should be clear and decisive. I believe in this document, it needs to be clear and decisive that we're more than just leadership or support and stuff like that. It's got to be that we can then also go that extra mile in supporting the resources or the capabilities that what comes up from the ground up that we can do as a CDEM group. I think that's really important, because we can go through these documents and they have all these nice words in it, but unless it actually gives us something to actually bite at that we can do through the plan to support, rather not be a sheriff, when we look at our legal requirements that Gillian went on about, and be a sheriff. I'd rather be a doctor and have the medicine to give out to the TAs or the local communities to do that. Is that possible, or to do the wording stronger? I see you shaking your head, Susan. No?
I think it's a great aspiration, but I think we need to recognise the limits of our expertise and resources. I was going to give feedback. Sorry, Vicky, I haven't had a chance to go through the document in detail, but part of our vision is, of course, empowering the community, and maybe we should draw that into part of the vision, in that we leverage or partner with the community, whatever group they may be, to actually provide the work that you're talking about, Councillor.
Yeah, that's virtually what I was saying, Susan. There needs to be just something in there that, whatever comes from the bottom up, because I don't want to see, us going out, and we all agree that we need that information and feedback, but then just to be the status quo, as John said, after this plan, I'd like something in there that we can, the abilities that we do, and hopefully when the new act comes out in June 26, it's going to be clear and decisive that, hey, if we need those resources, then we need to make sure that central government are making those resources available to us. So it's a flow-on effect all the way down.
So I suppose I'd probably go back to page 7 at that point, the goal number 3. So I hear you talking about the wording about that we empower those capable of being self-resilient to take responsibility for their own well-being in an emergency, thereby allowing resources to focus on those disproportionately affected and in greater need. You empower is probably the word that I hear that you're having the issue with. You say that we will.
Yeah, Vicky, all the way through, whether it's empower or leadership, it's very feeble in actually, saying that, through the plan, what we should actually been able to do, go back to, I don't know the quite wording. I don't want it to be too flimsy that we haven't got the power to do anything apart from leadership and, empowering, whatever that means, I'm a bit of a grassroots. I like seeing stuff done at the bottom and being able to do that stuff, whether it's through resources on staffing, we looked at in there, whether it's, I do believe there needs to be a lot more staff that are trained up for the emergencies, because it's not as though these emergencies happen, all year round, but when they do happen, they can happen quite, with velocity that needs a lot of people on the ground. You look at Hawke's Bay, you look at Gisborne, you look at Auckland with the flooding, and then you look at COVID, how communities were isolated. And that was brought out, through the JMA, especially during COVID, what communities are left on their own and resources. So I think this plan needs to, for the next 5 years, give us a little bite that we can be a doctor rather than a sheriff to these communities and groups and TAs as well.
Sorry, yeah, just following on from Councillor Down, I absolutely agree that it would be good to have that direction. But I guess my question is, where does that resource come from, and how can we get that assurance that that would come from central government before we're committing ourselves and within the plan?
I think Councillor Downard, I think your point's well taken and received. I suppose my issue is it's unlikely that we, as a group of local authorities, is ever going to get adequate resource from central government, and I think that's just a fact of life. Where I was going in terms of partnership is not just building the resilience, but actually we leverage the expertise, the resource that's within our communities to actually respond and build resilience. So rather than being the only doctor, we actually, I don't want to torture the analogy, but we actually do help build and have the ability to use the resources that are already in the community. I was very taken with the presentation we got from the group in Christchurch, how they actually respond and how they actually build resilience by using groups in the community, and the leadership and the empowerment comes from their emergency management groups.
But it's not a but. An assurance that the current act the current act is not superseded by the group plan, and the current act gives the joint committee the option to, as a collective, resource and provide resource. So it gives you the tools to provide what Councillor Downard was asking, should there be an agreement to do so, but that money would come, or those resources would come from within the region and across the collective. So those tools that those, if you want, hard tools are there for you, and they're in the Act. They're not going away. As a matter of fact, the indication I've got from the workshops I've been to at central government is there is talk about what does a minimum standard, or what does a consistent standard of resource look like across emergency management in New Zealand. So in terms of making sure that there are not, there's no postcode lottery when it comes to the resources that are there. And then that comes, of course, with questions that we are pushing back. We as group managers from the special interest group are providing feedback into central government to say, well, that's great. If you're going to raise the bar, we applaud it. But what funding comes with that? So where's the resource that comes with that, given the context of financial constraints at local government level? So I think there are tools there that, should the group have the appetite and the resolve to say, because you have to, under the legal, I hate to be the sheriff, but I try to protect you as a group by saying you have these powers. You have these powers to turn around and say, we will have additional training, we will have additional resource, but then you've got to decide where that money's coming from as a collective. If you're going to share that as a collective, going back to Vicky's conversation about the haves and the have-nots, that's what she's talking about. The community of the haves we can give them one coat of paint and ask them to look after themselves and empower them to look after ourselves. There are some communities that need more than one coat of paint and they don't have the resource to do that. And that might be, as a collective, you've got the opportunity to direct that resource is collected and sent there. But other than that, so that exists, that's not going away, that's not undermined by the group plan. It's the collective of your colleagues.
Yeah, sorry, I won't go on about it, but it's just those words in this document, empowering, leadership and stuff like that, for someone that's not a councillor or in the politics reams, and that's what we're talking from the ground up. I'd like them to actually see something that we can actually do something to help these communities because it's a bit of a looking in a crystal ball, emergency management, on what areas that it's going to affect, how many people it's going to affect and what it is. So, I'd like something just a little bit more clear and all the way through when we talk about empowering leadership, and there's other words in there as well through, coordinating executive groups and stuff like that, that the people at the grassroots or the bottom up can actually understand, right, this is the help that we can get when this emergency comes in. We know where to go and what to do. Because that came quite clear through, even during COVID, a lot of these communities didn't have that, emergency management person coming into their community because they were stretched out. So, I hope we get a lot, through this, is that emergency management isn't just about an event, it's preparing for it as well. We talk about infrastructure and, the things that we build, or the wastewater that goes out the drains. Do they need to now, infrastructure to be made bigger because the smaller ones now are not coping with the weather events? It's all that kind of stuff. So, I think this document needs to be clear and, for the Joe blogs, that they can understand, and this is where the help's going to get. I think that's always dribbling on a bit.
Thank you. I suppose moving into the next section, again, we have to state our structure, and this covers off the executive, which is the chief executives or their delegate from local authorities, alongside our partner agencies sitting here beside me, senior management representatives from the police and Foreign Emergency New Zealand and Te Whatu Ora, along with other members that can be co-opted at that executive level. But those are captured outside of this. Again, there's a terms of reference for them, and that enables future growth, change within that executive structure. So the Act doesn't limit that. Now, going through the roles and responsibility in the end bullet points, we've strengthened up the wording in those and tried to provide clarity so that it states ensuring that any resolution approved at KEG meetings are supported, budgeted, resourced and implemented locally. So that executive that comes together and agrees to that, that's then taken back and enacted. So that's a new frame of, and also about the reporting on progress and outcomes of the group action plan. So that's in the next level discussion, that group action plan, that's what we're going to do, what's coming down the road in the next year, and that will have the metrics that we will hold ourselves accountable for, that will be reported up. And those outcomes and resolutions to ensure accountability and transparency. Also asked in addition is stating, even some things have been a given, but they haven't been captured, championing CDM outcomes at the executive level, both locally and at cluster opportunities. So when they come together at local government chief executive forums, we would love that civil defence emergency management be a standing item on that agenda, just to raise those at different levels. So I'm looking across at the chief executives going, and also about considering the impact of CDM outcomes on all aspects of business as usual and having appropriate business continuity plans. So that's one section there that's been strengthened from the current group plan. So I just wanted to highlight that within here. Okay. Then we go through to group arrangements, and that's about the roles and responsibilities that are put upon the group office that are set by the Joint Committee and KEG. The administrating authority, and again, there's been things that weren't in the current group plan, and it just leaves that little bit of grey area. So for clarity, from administrating authority, being Waikato Regional Council, that they will receive the CDM group set budget. So the Joint Committee sets the budget, and Waikato Regional Council includes it in their long-term plan and in the years in between any amendments for inclusion in annual plans. Obviously, there's workings with that because if they've got nothing major going on and not undertaking an annual plan review, but that's the how. But also ensuring the necessary targeted rate of structural collection on behalf of the CDM group, and support the CDEM group by maintaining appropriate accounting practices in accordance with targeted rate requirements. So the funds that they collect on behalf obviously can only be used for a set purpose, and that's ensuring on our behalf that they have structures in place on that. So, sorry, along with that section, I'll just see if there's any queries on any of those. Okay, well, that leads us into the money, financial arrangements. Okay, again, a lot of this has been lifted out of the current group plan, but it's been reviewed for members and the community and everyone to provide clarity around who pays for what in what situations and as what roles. So there is a table on page 32 that is outlining framework on how charging is applied across the group. So it's undertaking those work programs that the time and the cost of that is the members' costs, the individual members' costs, not the group as a collective. But obviously the group workforce is a group cost. So I'm not going to go through them all, but any feedback on anything, any differing opinions, or if you see that there's anything in there that needs strengthening. Okay. And then we go through to how during emergencies, expenditure in a civil defence emergency, and clearly spelling out that local authorities are responsible for meeting all costs associated with their own CDM personnel, facilities and resources. So just some things that weren't stated currently, just again, it's there in black and white, and there's no ambiguity throughout the document is what we're looking for. There's no change from current practices, but they just haven't been captured. Then it's the same with the recovering costs in a CDM emergency and recovery finances. There's really nothing new. There's a capture of what's happened during recent events about mechanisms for essential infrastructure, disaster relief, other bespoke funding recovery mechanisms may be created during the recovery process. And just to capture in that, like again, to provide that information because that's what's happened during recent events. So it's not a new intent or anything like that, but I just like to highlight to you anything that's any change from where we currently stand or that's currently captured in our group plan and writing. So that's just a really fast overview. I presume that everyone's all across that and you don't want me to go down into detail, if everyone's happy, I will pass over to Mark.
Thanks, Vicky. This next section is around the support arrangements, and yeah, once again, there's nothing too new in this. It begins on page 35 with the local arrangements, the city, district, and regional council. Most of this is a lift and shift from the current group plan because it's fit for purpose. We clearly state there at the end of the first paragraph that the Act sets out the functions of the CDEM groups and each of its members, just to reinforce that empowerment and obligation, I suppose, on each of the city, district and regional councils. And then it mentions that emergency management is enabled through resourcing through such as long-term plans and annual plans, which is pretty clear. Page 36 really goes through some of the partner agencies and some of the key agencies, and also some of the groupings that we have, for example, welfare coordination group describes that, and then over the page it describes the Lifeline Utilities group that we've had in the Waikato CDEM group area for many years, and our obligations to neighbouring CDEM groups. Incidentally, I think the Waikato district has the most neighbours of any CDEM groups in New Zealand. On page 38, there's a piece on volunteers, acknowledging that volunteers don't have defined roles and responsibilities in the plan. However, they're acknowledged as important to the emergency management system. And then finally, of course, the Waikato communities playing their role as individuals, as whānau, households, and groups in the community, undertaking and their part to play in emergency management. Any comment or thoughts about that section? It's pretty much as provided for in the existing plan.
Sorry, if I may, I just wanted to highlight, I just know where I've actually added additional sections and highlighting that spontaneous volunteers is an addition. It's never been, not current in the, captured in the current group plan, but that operational level, so that means those local levels. So this is a pointer for you that they need to have consideration for spontaneous volunteers, not only from a health and safety aspect or, you know, public safety, that level of thing. So that's just an addition, just to highlight.
Thank you. The response arrangements start on page 39. Once again, like the rest of the plan, it's the what, not the how. So we've tried to keep it quite high level and talk about the arrangements that we have, that there are emergency operations centres at the TA levels, and that there's a group emergency coordination centre. And the role of those centres are to the integration of responders, including the Māori response, to achieve that coordinated and comprehensive emergency management. There's a little table there on page 39 which nicely summarises the where the different levels of response fit in. The section on controllers and coordinated incident management system, don't think there's any change to that from the existing group plan. And then it goes on to probably one of the more operational aspects in this whole document, deals with the duty system and warning arrangements, which are the warning arrangements are summarised on page 41. And for my money, that's a bit of a departure from the rest of the plan. It does go into a bit of operational speak, if you like, and does set out the roles and responsibilities. And I suppose that's reflective of making sure that we understand which, what our respective roles are in that really important providing warnings to the community. And as Councillor Downer had said before, so that organisations and people are forewarned, can take action and can do what they need to do. Any comment on that, on those sections? Just make the note that where relevant, we refer to policies. So, for example, in the controllers, we refer to the policy adopted by the Joint Committee, for example. So where they're relevant. Moving on to declarations of emergency, that's been a lift and shift out of the existing group plan. There's really nothing added there. Vicky, looking at you. No.
I was just going to say, I might add, so that's a lift and shift. And again, at the joint committee meeting, when this goes through, there's that opportunity that you're happy with the current arrangement of declaration and the structure within the joint committee. We're not just presenting this to you as done. This is the current standing that's been carried forward because there's nothing seen wrong with it. But again, this is the joint committee's settings, and yeah, so just to highlight that.
Kevin's going to talk about recovery.
Yep. So on page 43, we're on recovery now. So recovery includes the four environments: social, built, economic environment, and national environment. That was really highlighted when Danielle presented on the hazards. So that same four environments become environments as part of the recovery process. What we did with this plan this year is we've actually taken it into three different components, looking at recovery managers per se, and that includes the development and the identification and training and all those sort of aspects around the individuals that needs to be the local recovery managers as well as group recovery managers. But that also includes stuff like recovery office, the establishment of recovery offices, and also the agencies that work alongside the recovery managers. The second part is in the legislation or the director's guideline, they call it strategic planning for recovery, but that is nothing else than pre-planning for recovery. And council are currently doing that work to have that done by June this year, or their local planning in this space. And that includes work around communities, staffing, resourcing, and all those sort of things, and in their own infrastructure and manage retreat and all those sort of things. That's all part of the pre-planning for recovery that the councils are doing. And then the last part is the managing recovery. That's actually the doing of recovery. And that includes stuff like, let's make resources available for locals and for a group to actually do the recovery per se. And then if you look at the stuff in the document, it's about one page compared to last plans, quite a lot of pages. But in the meantime, we've developed a lot of documents that actually supports this document. So we don't need to incorporate those documents in here. It's already stated somewhere else.
And I'll just note where there's some clarification provided under managing recoveries and just stating out, as again has happened from recent events, initial recovery or transition to recovery would be undertaken by CDEM recovery managers, but longer term recovery requires significant financial considerations and should ordinarily be led by local authorities. So just to note that that's a new inclusion.
Okay, last is the assurance part on page 44. And this is, well, I suppose from a top-down approach, we acknowledge NEMA's role in providing assurance framework and the development that work being undertaken at NEMA. However, at a group level, we've got our own requirement to have an assurance program. The items 1 to 7 are the assurance that we provide now, and it's the once again, it's the what we're providing assurance on, not the how. With the different approach being our plan being more strategic, the success factors against each of the objectives right back at the start are going to be important to define them so that we can measure our progress against those success factors. So we assess our progress against objectives and then against our performance of delivery, and that comes back to the local level, so that are we doing what we're saying we're going to do, and how do we provide assurance back to the Joint Committee and therefore the community. Any additions here?
I'll just touch on the administrative part at the end about including, we're well aware of what the civil defence world is like, and that there'll be the definitions of what these terms mean. You know, so like we use communities very broadly and stakeholders very broadly, and it can be the same people, but just with a different circle or around them in different circumstances. So, you know, and this again is also for the public so they understand communities. They don't just think, oh, that's my town that I live in. It can be by location, it can be by interests or communities of practice. So, yeah, sorry, but that's just a little administrative touch too and support the document.
Thank you. So next steps.
I suppose, as Mark just alluded to, the next steps that are key to this is the operational workshop this week, which we have an external in to, because we're very involved in this in that operational side, to provide that step back picture, and that person has expertise and has been a group manager and dealt with the group plans that may not have been sufficient during responses and things like that. So we are leveraging off that expertise as well as being a planner by trade. So I think that's the key component to next. Like I say, we've still got reviews of, you know, providing out what's been captured in here to subject matter experts, ensuring when we change something that it's fed throughout, and that this then goes to KEG on the 7th of March for that executive review, and they'll then provide a recommendation through to the Joint Committee meeting for the 24th of March.
Thanks, Vicky.
And I've just got a couple of quick questions. Sorry to go backwards, but I was trying to catch up on some of the reading. But in the financial section on page 33 at the bottom, it talks about volunteers suffering personal injury or damage to their property, being able to make a claim for. And I'm just wondering about the personal injury side. That surely that's becomes an ACC thing, not a claim for.
I think that's a good pick up, and I think that's a lift and shift from the current group plan, and that's why there's still ongoing review. That this is a strategic document that does not need to be included in there. That would be outside of this. So thank you. I'll put lovely asterisks by it.
Yeah. And one other thing, just going right back to the objectives, and there was discussion about trying to include iwi in some of throughout the objectives, which is, I think is a fair point and good idea. But the wording for that doesn't, can't make sense of totally in some of them when it talks about including partner agencies, iwi, mana whanua, and representation of Maori. You know, for some of them, when you talk, the added bit of representation of Maori doesn't sort of make sense. Just the wording,
Just the terminology of the wording. It's
terminology of the wording. Maybe something you don't need to answer now, just to look at and just see whether there's better wording.
Yep, like I say, we do have support from Waikato Regional Council that will look at all this aspects to ensure those cultural references are correct and reflect what we are intending. Thank you.
Sorry.
And so that's, unless there's any further questions to the document as a whole, or I'm looking to Julian as a group manager, there's nothing you want to overarchingly say, so I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you. So, joint committee, how do we feel about the new plan or information that we've got from the staff? Thanks, Annette.
I just had a thought, it would be quite good for the joint committee to do this at the beginning of their term. But yeah, I think it's making it a more user-friendly document. Yeah, it's a good intention.
So that is the aim. So when there is the new joint committee, that they have a document that's readable and understandable and spells out, roles and responsibility. They have that understanding of what's happening at that local versus that regional, what the group is as members, what the group is with partner agencies, all that aspect of things. But it's really is leveraging on all your knowledge and over the last 3 years to actually get this adopted before elections, and that will enable the new joint committee, whether it's existing members or new ones, to have a workshop on this. And that, like you're right, that's key in their first meeting of, it'll be 2026, I see, that being a key workshop that to be undertaken and go through of the why.
Yeah, I think workshop would be good. I remember when I came in, this is my 4th term, and Anna had obviously been key in the previous big draft, and it was sort of a done deal, especially with Chairman Hugh at the top. So I mean, I think that's the same thing across a lot of elected members, the different tasks, like different areas of responsibility. It takes time to wrap your head around it, and some more clarity, like the clarity of what you're planning and doing, working on here would be helpful. Well, I mean, it is going to be very helpful.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, look, I think it might, if it's helpful or not, if you heard the team talk about lifting and shifting from the other document. There's a lot of lifting and shifting from the other document because some of it's still very relevant. But the shift that we were trying to, or the shift that we are trying to, it's not a shift, uplift, we're trying to get in the new document is very much in the space of community empowerment. So not doing it to the community, enabling, empowering, whatever the right words are, but enabling those communities, resourcing those communities, supporting those communities to be more resilient and able to respond, recognizing that the resources are slim. So we really want to have an uplift in the language and intent and focus around uplifting community capabilities and capacity where needed. Then the other one is around roles and responsibilities, and Councillor Downard talked about this earlier on. There is a real lack of not vision, a real lack of clarity or emphasis on the role of reduction and that role of local authorities and other agencies, and how that abutting legislation needs to be used, and actually you as a group need some visibility around that. So we talk about in here, the document talks about ensuring that some kind of resource, I think I can't remember the exact words, but is ensuring that resources are considered by the local authorities and investment is considered by those local authorities to uplift the game in that reduction space. So it doesn't say how that's going to happen at the moment, but the work plan, the annual work plan that goes with this might at some point, for example, say at year 5, every council in their LTP will have something that says there's investment in pre-disaster recovery planning, for example. I just picked on that one. So that's another uplift, is the importance of CDEM not just sat here, it relies on those other agencies using their own legislation to strengthen and reduce. And then the other one was iwi. It was uplifting the game in terms of participation and inclusion of iwi, irrespective of what the legislation says. You as a group have already signaled you want to do that. So, and then the assurance space, an uplift in the assurance space. And the assurance space, unapologetically, is protecting you. And that is because you go back to and I pick on the Auckland experience. Auckland's review of Cyclone Gabriel was about that they did not monitor their group plan. That was that's one of the biggest bits of feedback they got. So it's the Civil Defence Joint Committee did not actively manage and oversee the delivery of the group plan. That assurance for you, given our complexity, given that we're 11 councils and they're unitary, again, that's the uplift. So they're the 4 areas we're looking to have an uplift. If you're looking at that and saying it's not strong enough, then please tell us and we'll do something about it.
Mr. Chairman, yep, Julian, you hit it on the nail, exactly what you've just said. That's what I want to see come out of this plan. All those things, and that's what I was trying to communicate through this workshop.
And I'd reinforce that too. I think that it starts to crystallise things when you look back at some of the reports that we've read from the for Auckland Hastings and our own report post Gabriel. A lot of that sort of starts to filter through into this report, which I think is a real key to it. The big takeaways from today, and I won't dwell back over it because we covered it in public excluded areas, but is really the reforms that are taking place and really just keeping a monitor across that from the impact that has to the way that the aspects of our overall programs operate. And to me, that's a real key. I reinforce the words that I said earlier, that I think that they are really significant, and the bottom-up approach versus the top-down approach is quite a change, and that needs to be built in strongly into the wording of the document. I always test that by having a look at a real live example of things and trying to think that through and how it would play out within that. And one example that sort of stands out to me at the moment is from our own area is the concerns around bushfire, for example, and the recent announcement from Christchurch or Canterbury about some of the new initiatives that they've put in place in those areas, and how which were around early warning systems for, and I think you might have put something out on that, Julian, some time ago around a new initiative, or we've seen it in any case that came out, and how would that apply, to what we've been reading today, particularly around the sort of hazard identification, and who drives those things? Who's actually responsible for the readiness in that true sense? Is it fire and emergency? Is it CDEM? Who actually initiates some of those activities? And I think that sort of gets to the hub of the feelings that I've been hearing around the good words, but how do we actually bring them to life and make them work from our regional level, our local territorial level, and that's sort of where my thinking is at the end of today. So,
no one else? I'd just like to say thank you to the staff for getting this draft plan together. It comes back to the joint committee next month. Yep, next month. So that'll give those members that weren't here today at the workshop a chance to go through it. If they have any queries, they can just contact any of the staff to make Vicky to make any changes. So if they find something that is not quite right, they can then contact you, and maybe you can have a discussion to see whether it can fit in if they want to do any changes. So that's the end of our workshop today. So those were the karakia. Thank you, Julian.
Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, o tata whaiorihi, o hihu karaiti, me tau hāraha o te atoa, mi te whiwhi na taitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene.